Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, The River of Truth, Fairies Are Real. For those of you who are here for the first time, I highly recommend that you listen to my first video, which is the History of the Fae Part 1, because this is the continuation of that video, the History of the Fae Part 2. And I decided to come up here on the hill where it all started. The tree behind me, which is not showing too good in my video, is a beautiful oak tree, and a lot of my fairy friends live over there, and they're probably all watching me right now practice. So I thought I'd come up here. It's a beautiful day. Now, in the first video we talked about how the veil between the fairies and humanity was created and why and what happened, and it started back in the days of Atlantis and Lemuria. Now this is the continuation of that history, and I'm continuing with a period of time of the 12th century. So we're going to speak of the druids in this part of the history, and this history was given to me from Jonathan, and I pretty much kept it in his wording. I mean, there was a little bit of switching, but for the most part it's kept in his wording. So I read it because I don't want to forget any details. So I'm going to continue, but I highly recommend that you listen to the first part of the video, because this is a history that you're not going to get in any history books. So this is true history of what's happened and why. So I'm going to begin. The Fae had a kind of civilization. Let me start over. The Fae had this kind of civilization, and this goes back to the 9th and 10th century. And when I say this kind of civilization, I'm talking about the druids. Up until the 12th century, they had many of that kind of civilization that practiced the dark arts. So the dark arts wasn't just a human thing. However, it all began to change and grow and turn into different types of things, depending on the type of energy applied, whether it was good, light, or dark, or whatever. So all of the belief systems took form, whether it was dark or light, religion, and different belief systems formed on both the good and evil sides. So in the time of the druids, there was a great focus on natural healing and natural remedies and living in nature. However, that was misunderstood by the dark. It was something that made no sense to the dark. The dark wanted people to come to them for a cure, but then they wanted your quartz crystal or all your crops or whatever they could get for payment. Kind of like today. And this is still happening today, but in the form of money. And we all know this. We all know that our medical system has been taken over by Rockefeller medicine. It's been completely corrupted. And now we know when it began. The roots of every problem stretch back to the past, and it has like a thick, twisted vine that has grown through everything. So coming up to the 12th century, we have found that every type of belief system that was developed in the human world was also mirrored in the fairy world. And this, to a great extent, was the same with the light. In other words, the light created many belief systems, like, for instance, the Mennonite faith, which many of my fairy friends up on the hill, which I'm at today, have been for a very long time. Very long time. A lot of my fairy friends are of the Mennonite faith. Just like in the human world, in the fairy world, they have all different belief systems. The difference is it wasn't corrupted like ours was. As I continue, as much as the light had permeated their thinking, so had the dark worked on the other side. The dark side of the Fae civilization, though it is not as large as the human population that went with the dark. As time went by and there was more technology, so it was easier to produce food and clothing and so forth. Less and less of the dark had control, and individual people could make a living for themselves. And this happened in many different countries, many different continents. However, there were some that were left out, some that are still left out. And there was so much of this happening that it created a wealthy class. And this is happening today as well. A wealthy class and a poorer class. In the dark, that was how it was. In the light, there were many who were spiritually wise enough to see through all of this. And as time went by, we would have those with little education who were making things like printing presses, clothing, creating everything needed. So they had what seemed to be a genius level of understanding. I'm going to pause right there. So that darkness fell upon humanity in a larger extent than the Fae world. And the Fae were able to separate themselves from that. So the corruption ended in parts of the Fae world when the veil was put there. So the good Fae of the light were able to live their lives without this corruption. And humanity, even though we're going through a crazy, what seems like crazy darkness right now, it is the beginning of us separating from that darkness. So know that there is a light at the end of all this craziness that's going on in our world right now. And I'm going to continue. Where was I? So they had what seemed to be a genius level of understanding. This was also the Fae world. Now, the interesting thing about this is that right about the 12th century is when people began to see the Fae now and then. Now and then they would have a glimpse of one of them. And unfortunately, now and then they would have a glimpse of one of the dark ones as well. And so, now there is a complicated idea of the Fae being little goblins. That's a good way to explain it. From time to time, at this point in history, humans are beginning to see them more often. However, many of us were still very fearful. It was hard for the Fae to understand all of it. Many in Atlantis had a hard time seeing the ways of the darkness. They did not believe this darkness was real and deceptive. As time went by, they would begin to see it. And when the division happened, it was like a great sigh of relief. There was no more fear for the Fae. However, there was still fear for the humans and the Fae who were still in the dark. Much like what's happening today. Through all of this time, there has been a review. Every hundred of years or so, to see if there is a time when the division can be removed and healed. The division between the Fae and the humans, that is. But that has not come yet. Until recently, there is hope for a change. which is why our group is assembled here like this in this time. This group meaning Bonnie and myself and all my fairy friends. And there are groups like this all over the country and other countries. Therefore, there is great hope and great movement, and we are at the beginning of all of it. So hopefully one day there will be a review, and suddenly we will all be able to see our fairy friends again. Now I'm gonna elaborate because I'm done reading. In order for the veil to be lifted, humanity needs to learn to not live in fear, to live from the heart, to have integrity and love for all creation of life. And when I say this, I'm talking about everything from our galactical friends, from our earthly friends, animal and human alike, including our fairy friends. And until we have compassion and love, and the fairies of the light, they don't eat meat. They're vegans. So keep in mind that love and compassion is what's going to heal this world. And until we start going within and start understanding that spirit has a way of bringing us truth, we just have to open up and listen from the heart. And that is when the veil will be completely lifted. And this is the beginning. And I know that we're going through some craziness in our world today. But there's also goodness happening. And we're in the middle of the chaos. And the chaos will eventually die down. And when that happens, a new world is gonna blossom. And the only way that's gonna happen is through love and compassion. So that was part 2 of the history of the Fae, and I'm not done. I've got part 3, 4, 5, who knows? I have a lot coming up. So stay tuned for my next video. Have a good day, everybody, and thank you for joining. Please like and share my video if you found it informative.